consultant and author.
I'm Doug Gilbert from Denver, Colorado, and I'm at the University of the Rockies.
I'm Allison Leaney from Vancouver, BC, and I work for community and government to address abuse and neglect of seniors.
I'm April Feathers, also from British Columbia, 20 minutes down the road from my colleague Allison. I'm what's called a free-range consultant, and I range across disciplines and sectors, and do lots of the in-betweeny kind of work that pulls groups together. So.
I'm Sarita Faye, and I am doing research in Albuquerque.
I'm Allison Harkin. I teach at the University of Wyoming Gender and Women's Studies in the English department.
I'm Celiane. I'm from Brazil, but I live in the Netherlands, and I teach an international master's called Imagineering, and we have this challenge to develop collaborative research. So that's what we do.
I'm Saliha Bava, currently living in New York City, but originally from India. Thank you for reminding me to say that. And I am a full-time professor of marriage and family therapy at Mercy College, and also part of Taos Institute, and do the Taos Tilburg PhD program as well.
I'm Dian Hosking, English, as you can hear, living in the Netherlands, working as a professor in the School of Governance in Utrecht University. 30 years of doing research of all kinds and writing, and my latest publication, Show to Camera Please, is here. Thank you. Available on Amazon. So Sheila and I just finished this book last year on research and social change, which is very much written for this community and written for reflective practitioners who are engaged in transformative change work and inquiry. So we try to cover that whole range of sample that range of possibilities in the book, which we wrote for and out of the workshops we do for Taos Tilburg students in the PhD program.
Hi, my name is Laura Hyatt. Sorry, I was a little bit late. Got caught up in a dissertation discussion that isn't even stupid. How that goes. My name is Laura Hyatt, and I am a professor at the University of Laverne, and I'm the department chair for the doctoral program in organizational leadership, and I teach change and storytelling, mostly storytelling as a tool for research, or storytelling as a tool for making change.
Hi, my name is Maureen Hakala. I am an educator. I teach children with special needs in Los Angeles Unified School District, and I'm also a PhD student in the Taos Tilburg program.
Welcome. Should we take some of the online introductions if anybody's... Do you just want to post and then just fill us in? Okay, great. So I'm curious as to what people want this discussion to be like. What do they want to take away? What would be meaningful or useful here? Because you could go off in lots of different directions. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be good to start with some agenda setting. Yeah. What curiosities, what questions, or fast forward, when we leave here in 2 hours' time, what would you like to take away with you?
Well, in my case, I have been teaching qualitative and quantitative research methods for 10 years. And right now I have a project for a PhD fellowship. So in my case is to try to hear ideas and try to get creative about new forms to address my research, that it is not phenomenological, ethnological, hermeneutically. So I came to get inspired for
Did you bring
ways
inspiration?
to do research.
Yeah, I brought you.
Well, I'm sure I will get.
Cool.
For me, I've noticed, and I've said this to you personally, that this relational world that we're in right now is pretty much dominated by appreciative inquiry as a research model, so I'd like to hear more about other models.
And I'm very interested in the wording of everyday practice. I'm a consultant, and I'm trying to learn all the time and to create ideas integrated in my practice. So to open up a broader world of how to see practice and research integrated.
One of the things that I sense a little tension in the topic between studying collaboration as an area of research or using collaborative techniques and approaches in the research itself. And I'm really more interested in that collaborative because it goes completely counter to the PhD culture that we have in the U.S. at least, where individualism is. And that's the last individual research project they will do if they're in academia because everything else is collaborative once you're in faculty. So why are dissertations individually researched? I don't think it makes sense.
Yeah, so if I can bounce off that now, just to pop something out there, that for me raises the issue of what we might mean by collaborative.
Right.
So, for example, in the Taos, in the Netherlands and in the Taos Tilburg PhD program, it's possible for two people to join together to do a PhD. That would be one possible example of collaborative. But perhaps the more interesting one is how you see research practice, even when you're doing field experiments, as collaborative. That's probably, yes, I see some nodding heads, one of the areas that we might want to explore here.
Yeah, I'm interested in both those situations. In fact, I'm thinking about a PhD program where there's 3 people doing something together, which might be quite radical, I don't know. It's the way we work in the field and in every project I'm involved in, so it seems natural to me. Also interested in community-based research, whatever that might mean, and differs by community, I think.
We skipped you, and I'm not sure if you want to add something.
Yeah, no, I think I've sort of a bridge between these two sets of ideas.
Cool.
So a lot of the program that I'm in, they encourage this with people working together to write research projects and things of this sort. But I still feel the pressure of to do it by yourself is, or to create this thing by yourself is very worthy, very, it's very good, for lack of better words. Why is that norm there? That to be able to produce something on your own is more creditable than with a group. I don't know if that's out there with other institutions, but sometimes I feel that. So I just explore that idea.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just got kicked off. No, actually, I was going to say I'm particularly interested in issues of collaboration. Working in a gender and women's studies program, we're always talking about collaboration, collaborative learning, collaborative teaching, collaborative research. But I don't feel we really do a great job of living what we believe in. And so I'm hoping I'll be able to bring home some ideas to some of my colleagues as well as bring myself here. So thank you.
Well, I go along with all these comments, but I'm also very much interested in exploring radical ways of really embracing the collaborative aspects of doing research. So if we're taking the constructionist approach, and if we believe that when we are there in the field collecting our data, we are really already creating new realities and new opportunities, how can we really embrace it and make it the way of doing our investigation, and how that would be, how do we converse with legitimation issues?
Yeah, collaboration also raises the broader question of with whom. It could be very narrow collaboration between two researchers or two PhD writers, but in a more traditional way, research is about somebody. But if we think research is together with somebody, then the people that we are doing research about are co-creating some new insight in some way. And what methods do we use then to look at research as this kind of...
And to fully embrace...
Yes, I'm very interested in that.
Not just what methods, but how do we write about it? Who writes about it?
Yeah.
For whom? Yeah, it all gets very complicated, doesn't it?
Yes.
And I'd like to throw an additional complication in. If you're trying to work cross-culturally, as many of us do, I think, then that's a whole other set of things to consider.
Also makes me think of a NGO worker I was working with a few years ago who was Bangladeshi. He was working in the Philippines for an NGO which had as they often do, a standardized package for how they delivered, how did they call it? Well, anyway, help for the locals, so to speak. And he was mandated to use pencil and paper inventories for doing some local needs diagnosis. He didn't speak, he was working in two communities. He didn't speak the language of either of those two communities. The level of literacy was about 20%, and writing and writing was not the normal form of communication in those cultures anyway. So cross-cultural issues can become very, very interesting indeed. So of course we got him away from doing paper and pencil measures.
You first.
That was a hand up, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm planning on doing a qualitative study, and I guess one of the things I am eager to hear is some of the things that other people are doing out there, and also this idea of relational qualitative research sounds intriguing. I mean, relational to me would mean you're not doing it in isolation, you're doing it with others, and that intrigued me. So I'm curious about that. We'll develop from the conversation.
Now I can't say it because he just left the table. I won't do that. But I have a little bit different take than Doug. I don't think it's the last time you're going to do something by yourself. I think most places expect you to do something by yourself eventually. But and I see the dissertation as, and this is just my own personal viewpoint, but I see the dissertation as an important piece of finalizing your doctoral career, whether you do it with somebody or a bunch of people or by yourself. I mean, I don't think that makes as much difference as making it important. And unfortunately, or fortunately, the current state of doctoral programs is writing. So, at least currently, and maybe that'll change, and I'm all for that changing, by the way, but currently I'm a realist. For me, I'm here to learn about as much as I can, and I've learned so much in these past couple of days. I'm almost full. I'm saturated. I'm still trying to reflect. But I also think that it's important to democratize research. And I think by involving or engaging participants as being co-creators in a socially constructed kind of way helps to do that. It may not accomplish that task fully, but it certainly helps to do that. I'm always amazed that participants don't get to find out the results until you finish. And it seems like they're helping you to write this in some ways. So, or any research project. When I do a paper and I do research, they help me. So I want them to know what's going on all the time. So that's kind of
which for me ties directly to this question of what's collaboration. I think because in some ways you are defining it in one way, the way you're seeing it, and I'm curious, what does collaboration mean for different people? And it's one of those words that we all sit here in a community where there's like-mindedness, and we assume that we're all on the same page. But I don't think so, because when I start talking, I'm like, that slightly different. So I'm curious, when we were talking about relational or collaboration, what's of value here? What's standing out that you would see as be collaborative? And again, jump in if there's any other people who are wanting to share what they want from this conversation.
Well, can we refine that into two? There's the collaborative and there's the relational. So there's some concern about what we mean by relational in the context of research, plus this question of what we mean by collaborative.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask Maureen, what do you... Did you...
Someone over here was...
No, the one on Sally, we didn't hear from Sally.
Ah, okay.
Oh, well, I don't have an agenda other than to participate in the discussion, but maybe I'll start with the relational part. Because we might produce a single authored, or the only author listed on a research project, I wouldn't take that to mean that it's only been done independently by one person, because there are relationships across the board, from people who have read it, made suggestions, to people that we're interacting with. So I find it relational. Most of the time, I think there are degrees of collaboration, but I certainly see it as relational. I just don't know anybody who could do. Well, I suppose if you were doing something inanimate, studying something inanimate, and you were not involved with anybody, but I guess none of us would do that. So.
Well, even then, the research on the sociology of knowledge and ethnographies of how research is done in research labs still shows it as very socially constructed. So.
Well, and we're in relationship with all those who have come before us in some way, and the traditions and those kinds of things. So the idea of independent or single-authored is really quite artificial.
That is for the family, because the family is also part of the...
Yes.
Picking up the slack.
When you're spending hours writing your PhD, you mean?
In fact, I think one could just look at the dedication sheet at the beginning of the thesis, and that would tell you who all was involved in it.
But it's interesting, Sally, what you're talking about, because I think then we are starting a discussion from an epistemological approach. So we believe that everything that we as humans are doing, we are co-creating. It is collaborative. The second part of the conversation is how can I acknowledge that and make it very visible? And then we have the complications, as Dian said. How can we write in such a way that we acknowledge this co-creation, this way that it was done?
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. But if I can connect with that, to go back to these two magic words, I don't think I've ever used the word collaborative, and I wouldn't use the word collaborative. It's not one that resonates for me, and doesn't capture the role of relational constructionism, or the particular meaning that I give to relational. So whatever kind of research we're doing, from laboratory research through to ethnographic field research, it all involves the ongoing performance of relational processes in the way that Ken outlined this morning. And often people use this word relational to mean close or nice or conversational. So experimental research is relational. So the slightly different way I would pick up your second point, and this is just my language, actually it's not mine of course, it goes back to philosophy of science, I'm not here, is the subject-object way of doing research, where you position yourself as a separate subject knowing about your research object. That would be a relational practice, but it's not one that I usually adopt. Or what I think many of us would be interested in, if you'll excuse the mind reading, which is the trying to reduce the separation of self and other and bring in the multiple others, both in the ongoing sense of the research and in the sense of the multiple voices that we can give space to in the research. So I'm guessing that collaborative would mean, therefore, research in which we try to give space to as many voices as possible, with respect to the agenda, who it's for, how we're going to do it, who's going to do what, and what kinds of products, including some PhD or article evaluation, the whole way through. Potentially you could make multi-voiced if that was what people wanted.
For example, in my case, when according to what you are saying, I have in my mind for collaborative certain words or several words, and one of the words I have in mind when I think in collaborative is respect. For example, respect and being flexible. So when I think in collaborative research, I'm thinking about how I was writing. No, how do you use literature in terms of respect, honoring hierarchy, flexibility. The same how you invite the ideas to your project in terms of how you invite them in a way of you can include this respect and being flexible, etc. And especially in the research process, for example, in my case, how you can honor the curiosity of the researcher, for example, because what I have seen in the universities I work with is that people start with a curiosity, and in a way you are led by like other ideas, academic ideas, that this is something that you can research on. These are not. This is not a valid curiosity. So, for example, in my case, I wonder if collaborative research is honoring the research on curiosity, what they want to explore, be curious, have more knowledge about. And the other way about how I understand collaborative research is honor the ideas that the researcher has about all the steps. How the researcher wants to have the data collection, the use of the information, the relation with the participants, etc. And in my case, it's like to be flexible and respectful about how the people who is conducting the research wants to write things, to report things, to tell the things that initially was their curiosity. I understand collaborative also in this other layer.
I think we're also kind of hitting what you were saying as a distinction, of using collaborative techniques. So I am engaging my participant in the design of the research. That's one way of thinking about collaboration. But then there is the equivalent of what you're saying earlier about relational, which is what is collaborative, and if you were thinking collaborative, what does that mean from a research perspective? It's stepping further, not in terms of thinking about how I'm applying it as what is collaboration at every stage or with whom am I working, but I think of what you're saying, Monica, in terms of as a research advisor, I'm thinking that if I'm working from a collaborative perspective, before even the researcher who's working on this project is identifying himself or herself in whatever methodology and epistemology, how do I position myself in a collaborative practice? And for that, it brings up this sort of notion of legitimacy and norms into play, which is, and I'll use an example. I have a student who's in the Taos program right now, and her focus is on the whole notion of PhD ecologies.
What?
PhD ecologies. The PhDs are ecological systems in that sense. And so her process is she has written what would be considered like a graphic novel. It's got lots of images and people talking to each other, characters talking, and she's embodied the characters having these different voices of the norms and alternate forms. And this has been our journey of over 2-3 years of talking about how to do this dissertation itself. So the collaboration was, how do I suspend on my part the notions of legitimacy and what's the right method and where do you start, and do you start from the research question? Is it practice-led research or is it a question-led research? All these questions that we were having were also part of the dialogue. How was she positioning herself? How was she in dialogue with this? So when I say suspend, I don't mean I didn't engage that, but I didn't elevate it. I didn't put it as, this is the starting point. And that for me was collaboration, which is I'm learning in that process of how to be an emergent supervisor. I'm always thinking all research is emergent, but this is in a way different because it's so radically different. It's radically different in form, in how do you even, can a graphic novel be a dissertation? Is it acceptable? It's a performance and a way of storytelling.
Depends on who the receiver is.
Yeah. Right. And the receiver in this will be the university or the readers who make the committee.
And there are some universities that will not accept that.
Yeah.
Hands down. That's a no. Which is unfortunate. We all want that openness and flexibility, but you have to be realistic too.
Mm-hmm. So for me, that's what I was stemming in terms of, and I'm not directly responding into the distinction and the tension you made, but I'm talking about the tension of how do you even think about collaboration.
Well, you're raising a little bit interesting and slightly different issue. If you looked at Ken Robinson's work on intelligence and the multifaceted nature of intelligence, not just being what he calls, speak up, Ken Robinson's work on intelligence, and intelligence not just being this logical, deductive, prepositional type of intelligence that most dissertations definitely bring to the table, and that's all they bring to the table. He's talking about that we have a broader sense of intelligence. He gets into the arts that deal with artistic, deal with a multisensory approach. So why do dissertations need to be limited solely to this logical, deductive, prepositional type of a knowledge set? That then feeds into why do they need to be limited to research methodology, which is also not integrated.
Well, if I speak for the Taos Stillberg program, they don't. We have some very radical forms indeed, but like for everybody else, it's a delicate matter of who's on the PhD committee and all the careful politics that one has to play in order to be able to break the rules.
Right.
Because that's the dominant practice, that's the dominant discourse.
Right.
We're quite successful so far in doing that.
Well, I think it's admirable, and I think it's a direction that needs to be gone down and further.
It's very tricky though, and I'm glad that Saliha brought that issue up, because from the point of view of the advisor, you're very aware of community-based norms and practices, so you can easily get pulled into, well, you could go that way, but that could be dangerous, and you probably don't want to do that because you don't want to restrict their creativity. So you have to find some way of being with the person you're advising, but at the same time being aware of these crocodile pits that are surrounding you. So it's good to include the voice of the advisor in there and the difficulties that we have in steering and negotiating around these
we have the curious
tricky
situation in the U.S. in the academy of the tenure track professorship was over 60% of credits taught. As long ago as 15 years. It's now well under 50%. Some estimate 35%. And the guess is that tenured instruction will be less than 20% in the next 15 years. Most state systems are in the process of eliminating it.
So what does that mean for research?
I think it means that we are going to be freer to do things, because tenure is what drives a lot of this. It's that they know what they know, and they do not want to know more than they know in terms of the traditional non-collaborative research.
To take the line of academia, then we have to talk about where research gets published. I mean, as long as journal ratings and impact factors still remain, which also impact tenure directly, but indirectly, it's also about, I mean, when I'm looking from academic perspective, journals are also about whose research is valid and which journal is on the top level to make your case. I think the change has to happen at both levels. I can see what you're talking about change, but
the journals the traditional journals are having precipitous declines in circulation.
Definitely, yeah.
We're seeing non-traditional journals, and we're seeing ranking systems. Thompson has one, Google has one, that are not the traditional peer review of research. So I think the acceptability of collaborative research is going to grow. What it is a question.
I have a comment from one of our virtual participants, Katka, from Brno, and she's saying that she would like to hear more about what can be the form of writing down our researches. That's the topic we're talking now. Like, does it have to be writing at all? How about films or documents and so on? And she's saying that she loved, Saliha, your idea about novel as a PhD research.
Well, let me respond to Katka, because I know she's also working on her research. And hi, Katka, if you can hear me, see me, whatever. So this it's back to collaboration with the dissertation that I'm talking about. And I think Taos Stillberg is very progressive, and yet we are within that audience that you're talking about. So I see as the student's research as very performative. She is engaging the concepts in the way she is writing and talking about it. And this is my viewpoint and other viewpoints, including the internal faculty who looked at it, which is she still needs to do something about it. So the piece that she's produced is what would be called, like Harleen was talking, the witness part. She has engaged the discourse, she's danced with the discourse. And I think when Ken was talking this morning about engaging the process, so she's done a fabulous job of living those ideas. And yet to move it forward,
we need the so what.
She needs the reflexive piece that also came up, which is, and so what, and that was, she needs to talk about her work now. Mm-hmm. So it's an indirect way of saying to Katka that I think, and this may be a response to also the so what of our conversation, which is, how do we create research processes where the performance of it is it? Rather than talking about it. That's what I would say is the next wave, which in the field of arts, they could do something art and leave it, and it should speak. But even the arts is going, now, so what? What have you produced here? And there's a lot of debate going on in the art field where the art should speak to the audience and the witness, and it shouldn't have to be explained. Versus someone saying it's not academic if it's not explained. So it comes back to the aboutness and the explanation, and why do we privilege that? And I think that is back to the legitimacy issue and the norms. We are still beholden to those norms because we still, even though we're saying it's not about cause and all of this, but we're still going back to explanation in some ways. Why did I do this? Where? It's not explanation in the causal sense, but it is still making a case.
But is that just a kind of a professional research practice, or is that kind of a daily practice? Do we, if a team comes together and they have a good thing, or the planning committee, let's use the planning committee for this conference. Is there any doubt in your mind that they're not going to get together and take a look at it, examine it, talk about it, comment on it? Or will it just stand, no, the conference stands for itself? I mean, so sometimes I think we rail against things, practices, that we do in daily life, but we just don't like it because, I don't know why we don't like it, but maybe we feel hemmed in or constrained, or this is the only way we're allowed to go forward. So I think, anyways, that's just kind of...
No, I love that. I love that, Sally, because I don't think we analyze or do the aboutness of daily life as much as we do about certain other things, to take that angle. We live, Heidegger says, we live life forward and make meaning backwards.
Right.
So every event that comes along redefines what came before it, in that sense. So you might make meaning of how this conference went, what happened, having just done Saliha or at another conference 2 weeks back. So that conference influenced me in the way I was participating virtually in this conference. But this has already shifted my experience of what I'm thinking about the other conference. So that dance is what I'm talking as being organic. And I don't know, I'll pause there because I feel I've said a lot.
It just popped into my mind the conversation we had yesterday with the presentation of Mary when she was talking about academic performance. And if we talk about everything we do in life is a performance, and we have in life, we learn how to perform in such a way that we can make sense and be together. So the academic performance, the dominant one, requires us a certain way of doing research, of writing it down. And then you have the counter movements, and I would call this meeting right now a space in which we try to stretch a little bit this performance. Not too much in the sense that we cannot get our diplomas, we cannot be recognized as a supervisor, but a little bit that we make the bridge. And then other ways start being accepted and recognized. So I thought of that because when you said about the dance, I think this is also a performatory dance that we go back and forth. As a researcher, as an advisor.
And that's how we're framing it right now. That the way I invited this room to frame it is that this is the research PhD ecology, this is her ecology, and that dance, even though she's writing it as an aboutness, is still about the witness in the sense of she's having to do the dance. Mm-hmm. And that's in a way a dichotomy too. Like so yeah.
But there are techniques that kind of poke holes in that. Andrew Van de Ven at Minnesota has this idea of engaged research, where you are actually in the population you're researching. And that would seem to be by nature relational, all the things we're talking about. He talks about it as engaged research, so he uses a vocabulary which is acceptable to the academy.
Well, I don't know how much we want to spend our time identifying some other that stops us from doing the things we would like to do.
Yes.
And how much just thinking about how much it's changed since I was first working as a psychologist in an academic department, and you almost couldn't do qualitative research.
Right.
That's going back 30 years. Then I'm on the British Psychological Society board, and we create a division of qualitative inquiry. Yeah. And now there are journals of qualitative inquiry, and we went through a period where there were great arguments on the board about whether qualitative inquiry could possibly be science. We've done all of that. I mean, I think it would be so much more exciting to think about, to talk about how could we do more of the kind of work that seems to give us heart and energy and seems to be helpful to those we're working with, which is, and we could still publish that into the academic community if we want to, because there are a much wider range of journals now, and if there aren't, you put them on your website. I mean, I've done that for years. I couldn't get them published, I put them on my website, and one of my articles was highly cited, and it never actually got published because they wouldn't publish it. So, I think we can be radical, and we're out there in this great sea of uncertainty because we've got these. I was talking with another colleague this morning from the Taos program, also a professor on the program. Do we need some discussion about standards? About standards. Now, it's easy to have a shared community of standards when it's the normal science community. We know how to define and assess validity and reliability and general and blah, blah, blah. And when it comes to these other approaches, we really have to work on how we evaluate what is a good piece of work. Why would I want to give a PhD to a novel in a department of organization studies? Put it in a department of English literature or whatever. I don't know. But these kinds of conversations we're going to have as each case event comes up. And meanwhile, I think it would be, for me, it's much more empowering to say, how could we do more of the kind of work that we feel drawn towards? As you say, where we can be doing multi-voice work for the locals and with the locals. And there are plenty of examples: engaged research, participative action research, responsive evaluation. There are many examples that parts of the academy regard as sufficiently respectable that we know how to do that, don't we?
Well, I have examples about how my group at Campus Elíseos has been trying to do collaborative research. I'm not saying that it's exactly collaborative, but it's an effort to do it. And for example, last year we record all our conversations during the...
Could you speak a little louder?
Yeah, yes, of course. Last year we record every class or every conversation we had during... We have 1 year diploma or training. I don't know how to say that in English, but 1 year training. And we record all the conversations, and at the end of the year we had the transcriptions of those conversations, and then the members of the group that were like kind of spontaneous dialogues about the readings we were having, but plus to where the conversation take us. At the end of the year, and having the transcriptions, the group decided what to do with the transcriptions about all those conversations, which conversations were more interesting for the group, which ones we wanted to share. And for those conversations that we decided that we wanted to share, each conversation, what we wanted for each conversation to take form in that sharing, and that's what happened last year. This year, for example, we decided to, after each class, to have like a 5 lines of a reflection about the conversation, and we have been recollecting all those reflections, and then we were trying like to manage like a qualitative data collection, but then during the conversation about what we wanted to do with those reflections, someone proposed, and then the idea was developed onto do you know this book about philosophical research about Wittgenstein? That has like number 1, blah, 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 number 2, blah, 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 100, blah, 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 like this, like short sentences in this. That is just like ideas, and the group decided like to have, instead of theoretical introduction and then method and then like that these notes will be converted like in like tweets, like kind of tweets, and then to mix, instead of the theoretical frame and then the results and then like that, to mix these kind of tweets with some theoretical reflections. But it takes time, a lot of time, because everybody is what are we doing with this, and we can spend like 3 conversations, 3 classes in trying to have ideas about what we want to do with all that material. But I'm just sharing this effort. So we are not saying that we are doing collaborative. I don't know what we are doing, but we are trying to
That's an example for Kafka's question about form.
Okay.
Because I think that's a very interesting form where, again, journals or dissertations are dictated on how you should write. I'm thinking of Saliha, an article that came for autoethnography. And I reviewed it, and one of the other outside reviewers said, well, it's written in what is a very scientific form of what's the question, what's the methodology, etc. That's not how an autoethnography should be written, so it went back, and the researcher rewrote it, sent it back more in a storytelling fashion. And then literally a few months later, I had another autoethnography come through, and another reviewer, and it was written in that kind of scientific language, and that person said, yeah, that's great, and it went through, because I think it depends. It depends in terms of what form people are looking at in terms of research. But your example of both the process of research and the form it came out is very, very interesting, because it's a lot of that work. And my curiosity is, what did it create for them? Not just in the production, but what was their own experience? What did it generate for their learning?
Yes, and in this sense of Sally saying that we are doing research all the time, actually those conversations about how we are doing, what are we are doing with the information, would be also like research, in these terms of every quotidianity research.
And I asked the question what that is for them in their learning, because it comes back to that notion of everyday practices, in terms of everyday ordinary life as research. That if they were not thinking about this as research, but as they're learning, that they're looking at their process of learning and what they learned and they reflected. So is it learning or is it research, and how do you mark that? Or is it part of the everyday process of education?
It's a nice question.
It sounds like you could certainly store it as an example of collaborative inquiry. I was thinking of the Handbook of Participative Action Research. People are familiar with that. Co-inquiry, collaborative inquiry, there are all kinds of variations. So you could certainly story it that way. And then the other point I would resonate with is presumably part of the participant stories about why they're doing this is the pleasure, or however you want to call it, that they derive from participating in the process. I imagine that must be a major product for them, for you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the invitation, or where the idea came from, is because in Mexico City, in order that you get the International Collaborative Certificate, Grupo Campos Elíseos ask for a product that shows that you are promoting I think it is the only program that asks for an article or something that is published where you are promoting the collaborative ideas. So it is not something that came out from the same participants' interest, but we were trying to, in order they get the international certificate, they need to promote the ideas, and we are looking for ways to promote the ideas.
Maybe as I listen to you, I want to share a story that I do in Taiwan. That I'm currently working as a consultant for culinary school in Taiwan, and then it's a high school, and then the principal asked me as a consultant to use research as a way to help the teachers and the staff and students to understand where they are, where they can be looking for, sort of using research as a way to understand in their school. So I said that let's do something called action research. And first of all the teachers got very scared. Doing research, that we don't know how to do that. And so I began to talk to them about what is your interest, what would you like to understand, and sort of using very ordinary, common kind of language. This is a group of audience, population teachers who are wonderful teachers, but have no idea what is research. So I talk to them and hear what they want to understand and study. For example, a student said that one of my students, his father died a few years ago, and his mother has schizophrenia diagnosis, And this child, about 18 years old, has to admit his mother to emergency quite often when the mother's symptoms got. So the teacher came to me, said that, Teacher Wu, my name is Xujuan Wu, and she called me Teacher Wu, can I study this student? I mean, how can he do this? I mean, he has to take care of his mother, and he still come to school to learn to be a chef. And then often he would have to take his mother to the hospital at the midnight and sleep for 2-3 hours, and next day come back to school. And the teacher said, I want to study him. I want to research him. I want to know where the power is coming from. And I want to know whether this child's knowledge can be shared with the other students who may have difficult challenges in the family. So I talked to her about, okay, what kind of questions? I mean, just engage with her. And next week, she brought her student over. So we talked together, and I said that, you know, your teacher is interested in knowing about you, and he knows. So, I mean, I couldn't go to a lot of detail because of time. But I say to the teacher, what kind of questions you want to interview him? So we try to prepare. So the teacher say a couple of questions. So then I asked the student, I said, is the question okay for you? Is this workable, or should we correct the question or something? And he said, it's okay. My teacher can interview these questions. So they're co-researcher. I said, you are the co-researcher. You co-participate. So then I said that, do you have questions you want to be interviewed, but your teacher has not said those questions? And he said, yes, I have one question I want to be interviewed. So then he said that, okay, I need to translate from Chinese to English. The Chinese is 同流合污, means that like somehow you got distracted and you begin to make friends with people who have negative influence on you. Like you just go into that kind of direction. And then he wants to be interviewed that he doesn't do that. He is not influenced by bad influence. And he said his brother has been influenced by bad influence, going into gang and then crime, all of that. And he wants to be interviewed. How come he is not influenced by bad influence in that? So the teacher wrote it down. Okay. And then also I said there are some questions I'm interested in, and then consult with him. So okay, we made we compiled all the questions. And so the teacher later on interviewed this young boy, 18 years old. And after a while, we had a whole school presentation about the research. And there are about 29 research from this whole school. And they all are in the process of writing the paper. And I'm going to work with them and then put it in the WordShare book. There are a lot of very interesting ideas. Okay, so in the presentation, we invite this young boy to co-present with the teacher. So there's PPT, and the teacher began to talk about why am I doing this research, my interest, all of that. And then the student began to also share some of the research outcome, like the story. A lot of teachers were just sobbing as audience, because can you imagine a young boy to have to handle this? And then the students were very calm in talking about this. Okay, I try to kind of wrap it up because I tend to talk a lot. So what I want to say is that the whole there are about 80 teachers and staff listening 3 days, 29 presentation, action research. And there are lots of interesting examples you will all see in the WordShare book in the future. And then a month later, I asked the whole school, how was it for you to listen to this 29 action research presentation? They all got enlightened. And they said, oh, we can do research. We thought we cannot. And everybody's ready to do research. And this is a new semester, so I begin to work with them. So I think it's very ordinary. And I say it's not for the purpose of research. And then our doing research is to document what we do and going more sort of systemically. And then and I'm very touched by that. So I think research is incredible. It could connect to the community energy and strategies and skills. So every time I talk, I got excited. I just want to share this.
What a story. Thank you. That is really something.
I mean, going back to some of the questions that were raised earlier about democratizing research and about what collaborative could look like, that's a beautiful example. Thank you. But it's interesting, you also raised the issue of whether you would use the word research. You know, in the book with Sheila, we although the publishers wanted the title to say Research and Social Change, we used the language inquiry. The softer language, which opens up recognition ourselves as normal science research. I'm sorry, but we couldn't possibly publish that because your sample is probably not sufficiently large or systematic or blah, 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 blah.
Yes. You know, I'm just thinking, how would I translate inquiry into Chinese? You all have words in Spanish or in your own language? Inquiry?
Inquiry, indagación. In Spanish.
Different from research?
Yes, it's different. So research is one concept and inquiry is different. And before was used a lot research, but right now even the qualitative studies are evolving and using inquiry instead of research. Quantitative researchers are using inquiry.
And what does that mean in Spanish, inquiry?
Indagación is that, for example, research refers to using the empirical method, hypothesis, blah, 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 and inquire.
I like the blah, blah, blah part. And we knew.
So she's done your course then,
It's a technical term, as we all know.
I work in research to the bone and this is what I get back.
Now, it's important that you do three.
Blah, blah, blah. Okay.
I'm happy that you use it too because, but inquiry do not refer to follow a specific procedure. So you have. In Spanish, inquiry do not necessarily refer to a specific method. For inquiry is more like a desire or intention to interested in look into things, but maybe it's the same exploring. Yes,
it's sort of deeper than.
Yeah, and it's interesting because do you remember that, for example, research included hypotheses, right? But now they are using inquiry, using instruments, and using SPSS, but they are not using hypotheses. They are only using research questions. You know what I mean? But that's fine. But yes, we have a distinction. If your question is not the same thing.
So what that raises for me is curiosity, Which I'm thinking, as some of you said, like you said, you work in the in-between space, and some of you identify as being community researchers. I'm curious, how do you speak about the notion of research with your community participants? Because I think there is different language in language, but also there is different language in context.
Yeah. I think for our work, that we avoid the word research unless we're talking to researchers. And we always have researchers involved in what we're doing. But it is scary for communities to hear that word because they think there's something really rigorous about it. They think that they'll have to be displayed somehow in a way that's uncomfortable or that interferes with their privacy or their confidentiality. And because we work in an area of high sensitivity, it's adult abuse, prevention of adult abuse. You have to be very, very careful. You have to be very careful in the field because of both privacy and confidentiality. And often you can't work with people that have direct experience because it's not possible in a practical way. So you work a little more indirectly. But yeah, careful use of language, I think, makes a difference to how people can respond to it.
But would it also make a difference? You know, like, for example, if you're going to go public, then you're probably going to go by the rules of the health authorities or university settings or that. But if you were going to keep it in-house, which I think of research as daily practice, as really taking a look at our practices or the questions that arise from our practice. And if it's going to stay in-house, you know, all those bets are off, and it leaves a lot of flexibility to gather information, the kind of information that's pertinent, make sense of that information, very much in the way we do it daily, and come up with some answers. So it's a little, you know, and we've done this. We've done this at our center. And what happened was, this is what I thought was really cool. We said, oh my gosh, we're having some problems with these families, parent-child conflict. What are some of the discourses that keep this going? And so it was all our student interns, and it was the faculty at this center, all the therapists. So we wanted to publish this. So we went through the protocols. But what happened was, as we were going through the research, just the idea of talking about what do you think of parent-child conflict discourses that families are influenced by, our students came back to us with confessional tales. They go, we know the research isn't done, but we started talking about these things in our therapy sessions. And it was just awesome, because then the influence of practicing, looking at some issues as a group, influenced more practice, which influenced the ways in which we kept researching it or inquiring into it.
And I think we've experienced some of that too. The other thing that we've had to be very careful about is we work with Aboriginal groups a lot. And there's a whole tradition of knowledge making and a whole set of conditions that are now being made more explicit in Canada about how it's ethical to use other cultures' knowledge and the kind of negotiated equity that you need at the beginning to even enter into any of this, which is a very healthy process, I think. And we've actually kind of turned that into a bit of an inquiry as well, because we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to do it very well. And we've been pretty colonial in the past. And in an attempt to figure out what that means, then we've had to explore, to have more inquiry into those areas. And what that means is that we are then invited back into communities by having those discussions. Otherwise, you wouldn't get anywhere.
The nice thing, too, about that kind of inquiry is you don't have to wait till the end to institute any kind of change. It's like all part of the motion of working and improving and making some difference.
Yeah, and in that sense I would call it participatory. Because as you're following your inquiry or your curiosity or your ideas, you start to become aware of other ideas, and then you start to, what's the word for it? put them in, use them, make use of them. So it's very participatory. At least that was my experience, extremely participatory. At the same time as I was doing my action research, I was also reading literature reviews. And that literature review stuff that I was learning, I was also incorporating into my inquiry. So that was also a very interesting process for me.
You mentioned about hearing other models, I think, right?
Yes.
So I was curious, which models?
Well, I was doing what I is now, I did something and then I later tried to figure out how to name it. And it seems that it fits into this participatory action research model. So that's what I was. And that's a model that I don't hear much about here, and I don't see any literature out there on. So my problem is I don't really know what I was doing, but I was doing something, and now I need to talk about what I was doing. And that's because they sort of.
I think there's actually quite a bit of literature on participatory action research.
Well, apparently there is, but it's not here. Not within this, sort of constructivist relational world. Mostly I hear of
It's interesting. It's interesting. They do seem to be rather separate communities, and that seems to me just an artifactual production of who talks to whom. So Peter Reason, Bill Torbert,
Hillary Bradbury.
Yeah, somehow the communities don't very much overlap. We talk about it a little bit in this book, so I think it is extremely
But I think
useful line of work. Let me just finish though, because the point I wanted to make here is that the way many of the writers explicitly talking about participative action research write about the Onderstellings, the philosophy of science position, is humanism. And that might be part of the reason. It doesn't have to be, but that is, Peter Reason's very clear about that, for example.
Peter what? How can you spell the last name?
Reason, Peter Reason, Reason. He has his own website. And he's one of the leading
And there's Reason and Bradbury have a book about all the different types of action research.
The handbook of participative action research.
And to me that seems incredibly collaborative.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also as I'm doing, I'm incorporating what I'm learning, and it all seems terribly relational and collaborative to me.
I think we have to let go of the idea that something is this or it is that. How can I talk about it in a way that seems to be helpful?
No. I'm just glad someone said it.
Yeah, right. It just needs to be there. Yeah.
It's not always one or the other. There's a lot of blending
right.
and overlap and stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Also, this happens in every field. There isn't. You can't walk into any university where any field can teach you all the research mechanisms and methods and processes. There are so many that most people who do it on a daily basis can't even keep up with all of it. So you find out a lot of it even after you're done.
But I did find it an everyday life kind of experience.
Yeah,
it's very much an active, ongoing existence.
I think with regard to methods and models, I think what we get upset with is when they're imposed upon us and they don't make sense for the work that we're doing or the questions that we have. And so, but we also don't need to reinvent the wheel every time either.
Well, I have found this contradiction in research literature that they say that the aim of the method is that you share what you do, how you did it, what you did, how you did it, and in order to inform the other, all the steps, etc. But it's supposed that the methodology is for, not the methodology, the method is for that. But when you are very freely in your whole process and you report as exactly like you did in order to share, they say, no, it is not well done because the procedure was not done as supposed to be in terms of traditional research. It's like a double message, that it is not supposed that part is for to share exactly what you did in the way you did it, but at the end it is not like that because you have to fit. Well, no, it is the last concert that we were talking about. But what I'm surprised is how we find like double message all the time in research literature, even qualitative or even quantitative. But qualitative also have some points of contradictions.
And I think it comes back in some ways to a number of different points that you're speaking. One is the naming, and if you
The what? Sorry?
the naming and the context. So if it's going to particular readership or particular committee or particular group, and they have a particular way of naming things, and you have not used those names, then you've not done a good enough job. And that was the example I was giving about the autoethnography, because we are on the same journal, but you can see even within that, different editors or different reviewers have different conceptualization of how a particular methodology, when performed in writing, should look like. And so it comes back in terms of form that even you raise and Katka's raising, that I don't think it's only the form of writing, it's also the form of how one thinks about methodology. Absolutely. And so there is the performance of the epistemology too there that shapes methodology. And that's that example that you're talking about, the humanistic aspect. Is participatory action research going for something more essentialistic, or is it able to hold this notion that it is a construction that's functional in this moment and we are building off of it? Those are other factors that will come into play for me in trying to figure out what that tension is.
But then participatory action research is a beautiful example, because when you look with care at what they mean by participatory, then people like Peter Reason articulate this participatory worldview. And the participatory worldview is that we are part of nature, not apart from it. Right. So our knowledge is from within. We are talking about witness and insider knowledge. So participatory has a philosophy of science grounding. And whereas many people think, it just means we talk to people and we regard them as co-researchers. No. So you always have to go back, it seems to me, to we were doing it in another workshop this morning. What is your philosophy of science position? I know they're big words. We can always use smaller words, but that's what we're talking about. You have to have some clarity on that. Otherwise, anything goes. And then we don't really have much to talk about.
Well, if anything goes, the story's not as interesting either, because it's confusing usually.
I'm sorry.
The story's not as if anything goes, oftentimes then the story gets confusing.
Yeah.
Because you can't quite follow.
I don't know how to join with you, yeah.
How to replicate it.
Let me pose an example, because I've been thinking about this. How many are familiar with Kaizen as a technique? Okay, I'll explain it. I wanted to check. Kaizen is a Japanese technique of continuous improvement, which is the way you look at it from a business perspective. If you look at it from a research perspective, it's actually collaborative research. Everyone in the organization is encouraged through collaborative action to continually place suggestions for improvement into the Kaizen system. There's a lot of peer pressure for that. All of the improvements are based on observational types of research about what is happening. There's a whole technique that Toyota developed which is used, and it was developed by a university professor, interestingly enough. How would we position something like Kaizen as a research technique or a research concept of collaborative research?
Yeah.
How would we deal with that?
I thought you were just doing it. Yeah. By saying it to be so.
Well, I'm trying to draw on some of the expertise around the table.
It's not that something is an it, it's how we talk about it
Right.
for particular purposes.
How do we bring that into this type of conversation? It is clearly a relational method because there's an awful lot of...
It's a relational method for performance improvement.
Based on research of operational...
But it's for performance improvement. So if you're using that method in, say, a case study, which I know Boeing does all the time,
Yeah.
with it, to measure performance improvement, it might be appropriate. I think for me, the conversation gets hard for me because I think one of the things you have to look at, or at least for me, I have to look at, is every time I do a research project, there's a lot of methods I want to use and I want to try, but at the end of the day, does the question fit? To the participant, does it fit the study? And I think that people can be fairly flexible in their thinking if you can demonstrate how it fits the study.
But what if you had multiple case studies in the research? So that the objects are of any particular Kaizen effort is some type of discrete improvement. However, over time, if you did it longitudinally, you could have a series of cases which weren't necessarily hierarchical in the sense of building on one another, because they often build horizontally.
Right, but I think what I hear Dian and Sally Kevin saying is that it's okay as long as you can articulate.
If you can find an audience that will accept it, it's probably where we're coming down to.
Yeah, absolutely. Norms and standards are local to particular cultures.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Can I put you a question? If I made the analogy between collaborative therapy and collaborative research, for example, in therapy, I understand collaborative as a tailor-made conversation. But if I think in collaborative research, I'm talking about the same tailor-made. Because, for example, I understand in therapy, you are talking with you, and there is not two equal conversation, not two equal processes, because it is according to the person, according to that process in particular. But when I read the relational collaborative research, I thought will be the same thing idea about tailored-made process. So how do you, extrapolating the idea of how I understand collaborative therapy and how I trying to understand collaborative research, how do you deal with this idea of tailor-made?
Tailor-made?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tailor-made research?
Let's say that in collaborative therapy there is this premise that you cannot have two equal conversations with a client because it is according to that moment, that person, the needs, how the conversation leads you. So there is not two equal therapeutic processes. And my idea of, if I extrapolate the same collaborative idea that I am using in therapy to research, I wonder, which is your idea of you have this premise of tailor-made in collaborative research, or is a different thing?
I'm a little
Someone
confused.
follow
Tailor-made to me means it's set in place.
I think what Monica means is
that what you mean?
do I do research in the very same way, using the same principles and practices? Do I do my research that same way as I would my practice, or can I? That's what
yes,
therapy practice.
Because if I extrapolate the same idea stance to research, will be not two research processes equally. Maybe I'm not explaining.
Let me just say this. When I was graduating from with my PhD, they lined us up alphabetically, so I get in line just like I should. And behind me were all these physicists, all science guys. And I don't know, we just got to talking because we're at the end of the line. We have to wait a long time. And I said to them, well, so what kinds of courses did you guys take? And they were naming their courses. And I said, well, didn't you ever take research methods? And they go, no, we don't take research methods. That's what we do. And, light bulbs went off for me. It's like, well, then why don't we do research in the ways that we
Do practice.
Yeah.
But that's where we come back to this idea of everyday, right?
Well, every day it's still professional. It's still, within our
And it's also
daily
still getting
practice.
made.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
daily practices still, depending on, when you went to Canada, how is the academic system there, and how is it here, and then how is the Tilburg system. Even that, every day is not common. Every day is contextual, it's situated.
It's not equal.
It's not equal. So for me to respond, or my response to you, Monica, is how do you do practice as a collaborator? I mean, that's what Harleen is saying about collaborative therapy. What is Monica's way of doing that? And what are you picking from that practice that flows for you as part of this everyday practice that lends itself to the space that you call inquiry?
that's how I approach it, because I mean this is why I wrote this chapter on all methodology is performance and performative, because I can never do participatory action research like Peter Reason does. I'm going to take what I read, it's that interpretive process of understanding and the context, and in applying it so I make it my own. It's no longer Peter Reason's. And in doing it so, and naming it, this is back to this naming, and how I talk about it, I create it to be that, which is the performative element. I have performed that. But is it replicable? I mean, there are some principles, there are some common ideas, but it's not ever going to be fully identical. And that's the way I think about it, that even in research, I may have some guidelines, I may have some community A, I'm engaging in community B, I'm engaging on focus group A and focus group B, however you want to think. But the local interaction of what's going on, is the AC too cold, we got up, we had a break when we shouldn't have had a break. In the first group we didn't have a break, but we had to have a break when it came too cold and we changed locations. All that technically can shift the conversation as we know it. And that becomes part of that element of how do I then, as a performer of this research, talk about this? How did it shape this conversation? What did it do with this process? So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I'm always encouraging my students to talk about how they made it their own. What was their context? What was local to them? And how did it shape what they're calling as an inquiry, rather than the other way around, which is trying to fit what they're doing into this box, that language that's being pointed at. And I think it's the thing that Ken was talking about, right? Moving from this side of the reality of this is the world, this is the person, this is the language, to this is the language, this is how I've created it in relationship to people I'm in conversation, and thus I've created the story of the world.
And also when you say tailor-made, it makes me think how I talk to my students about research, and I say, when I'm taking this relational constructionist approach, I name it as design as you go, and it's a very messy process. And the students sometimes they come and say, I finished my literature review, now I'm ready to go to the next step. I said, you will never finish that, because you are in conversation with your participants, and some ideas might raise unexpectedly, and you have to go back. So you keep designing as you go, and then at the end of it, when you have to come to the process of writing and publicizing, then you have to organize in such a way that it has to make sense. And then didactically, you systematize, and then you write in a way that your community will recognize it, and that's what I call the rigor of the research. So I don't know if what you meant about describing every single process, every single decision you made that take you to this side or to the other side, that helps your reader, your conversational partners to make sense of what happened, what kind of knowledge you were creating together with your
And I'm thinking about what they wanted us to come and talk about, which is where do we go, where are we going? What was the question that
what now?
What now? And I think, Monica, you're speaking to that what now question.
Oh, no, sorry. I'm in the same position as her, that maybe I talk too much.
No. Well, then I'm in that position too. So.
No, because I'm now starting to feel embarrassed to talk too much. Maybe someone.
You've kind of already started to answer. The what now?
Yeah.
Now
Not putting
what?
you on the spot, but now what?
No, and I think your ideas are very helpful to keep going with the conversation. I don't feel like you talk too much.
Didn't somebody bring up radical?
Mm-hmm.
if we were going to go radical. Something about that. Didn't somebody say, is that this? Oh my gosh.
Why not? Radical.
Am I mixing
I
up
thought
my
you said
Yeah,
words?
did I say radical? I just did say radical.
It's been said now.
It's been said now, go ahead.
It's out there in space. So, I mean, because that might be part of the way we envision the now what. You know, we could think radical. We could think radically. We don't have to think radically. And radical is quite relative to where we're starting out from.
Yeah. And it sounds like performative needs to be another piece of that. Perhaps radical performative, or perhaps separate concepts there. But the performing and then the reflecting that you talked about, seems like we need to think more about that for the future. I need to think more about that.
Well, from a research perspective, I think researchers need to really explore what is performative going forward. I think Mary did one performance of performance and performative, but there's so much more. And in our group yesterday, we were exploring a couple of different other ways. So I think that's the next thing as well. Now what? So what? So what flows better for me than now what?
Or what next or something.
What next, yeah.
Or imagine.
Yeah.
Do we have any online people wanting to?
I'm posing the questions to them.
Oh,
I think the online people should answer the question first. Your problem.
What you're supposed to be speaking to this larger
Well,
group.
I have another question. So sorry. But which is the difference that you see between action research and collaborative or relational research? But they have like intersections, right? But which is like, you see difference or
The term action research is used to mean many different things. The recent handbook on participative action research is a great ensemble using different language tools like collaborative action research, co-inquiry. I mean, help me. There are all kinds of methods talked about in there in the context of a book on participative action research. And many of them come out of, some of them come out of an interpretive philosophical position, some come out of a much more radical humanist tradition. Originally, action research, going back to Lewin, was perfectly normal science. So that's post-positivist at its best, feeding back the results of an inquiry to the client. So action research, it doesn't mean anything in and of itself. It has meaning in a particular historical context. So when you look at the literatures, you can see these different ways in which the term is used.
and what would be like the uniqueness of collaborative research, if we can say that it has like a particular contribution or difference?
Well, can I interrupt 1 second? The group from Brno, we have 9 people watching, but it's almost midnight over there, and they said their bodies are not working anymore, so they're gonna leave the conversation.
And
so I just want to thank them.
Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you.
I think one of the big differences is that we declare or that we have a bias, that we are not objective observers, and that we don't hold an objective position. But one of the questions that I had, that I'm glad you brought that up, is that this thing about bracketing that I keep reading about.
Bracketing?
Yeah.
There are different words for it.
I know, but I don't really understand it because they claim that they're being objective, and then they bracket something, and then they're objective. I don't understand this. So this to me is a place. It's a concept that's used a lot in research because I read a lot of theses and I read more of the traditional ones, and they do this bracketing thing where they declare their bias, but then somehow they're objective. So by declaring your bias, they become objective? I don't really understand.
I think that's the post-positive.
Yeah. Some of the early, Changing the Subject. Do you remember that book by Wendy Holway and her colleagues? So quite deliberately playing on words, and at the front of the book, it's 4 women authors. The front of the book, they tell these short stories of their lives, and somehow that's supposed to recognise their feminist bias. And that was one of the first waves of how to work with the issue of bias, by saying, well, you know, I'm female and I'm this and I'm that and that, so you need to take this into account when you read my work. But bracketing also has a very particular meaning in phenomenology. I don't know if you're talking about.
Well, I read a lot about this one, and so this.
I wouldn't see that as bracketing. That
That's what they call it. Students call it bracketing.
Oh, really?
Bracketing.
Yeah, bracketing to me is just a process you use to call out themes and ideas and make sense of that. It has nothing to do with. I mean, every research project is biased.
I know, but if we ask, I'm just trying to answer your question about what the difference is. Prior, I think there was this notion that we could be objective observers and not part of the research, and not walk in with any kind of subjective, bias. So that was and now I see that that's shifting, right? And that's the one difference between collaborative relational, or if I try to answer your question, is that there's this concept of objectivity is no longer even debatable. So that's
I don't agree with that at all. No. Why don't you say something?
I think that you could go way back in time, and the person I'm thinking about really is like Margaret Mead in anthropology, and there was a lot of admission of bias and those kinds of things. I think if you look at different fields, a lot of it is field specific, and I think that the social sciences have actually always been more of the people who function in research on the margins, really, that make a lot of the strides. So
So I'm curious, what were you going to say before you said Laura?
Well, I think we can say what the claim for objectivity is, and that certain kinds of research would quite reasonably claim that that's the kind of work that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. But is that collaborative, relational, constructivist research?
Now, well, in the post-positivist discourse, you recognise that you cannot know that you know the world as it really is, and that therefore knowledge can never be fully objective, or never be known to be fully objective. So that would be the sophisticated position, and there's plenty of research of that sort. And, if I want to take some drugs, I'd probably prefer those drugs to have gone through randomized trials and blah, blah, blah. And there's certain contexts in which I would be perfectly ready to call for that kind of work. And I know what I'm claiming when I claim objectivity. It's that whole discourse of interconnected practices that together give that term objectivity sense. So it's always limited.
Right.
And
but that's the sophisticated version.
And what I'm getting a sense we're kind of getting off a bit here is you're trying to name it. Okay, so and I don't think intentionally you mean anything wrong with that, but we have a tendency as human beings to try to put things in like phylums and organize them to try to make sense of them, right? So just a little anecdote here. It happened to me in Taos. When I was in nursing school, I started my first career as a nurse. I can't believe I'm telling people this because it's so far away. I did my internship at the Taos Indian Pueblo, and I met this Native American woman who was a lot older and much more wiser than I at the time. And she had a dog, and she called her dog to come and get some food out of this can. And she said, "Come here, dog, come here, dog." And me, being a wiseacre, 20-year-old nursing student, said, "What, you don't have a name for your dog?" And she says, "Why does all the other cultures that come here think that they have to name things to own them?" And it was a huge lesson for me at that age. That was like the biggest lesson I took. Not the nursing work, but the biggest lesson I took from that entire experience was you don't have to name things to own them. You do have to try to make sense of them, but we don't have to name them to own them. And maybe that's what collaborative research is socially constructed, and you come to some, maybe a consensus. I mean, you know if it's agreement, and it's not equal necessarily, it's not equally divided. That we've come to some kind of consensus is this is what we're going to push forward as our next agenda. our learning. I don't know.
Or put it slightly differently, that you remember that that's exactly what you've done. There are words between you and what you believe exists independently of you. We always forget that we've done that.
Yeah.
So we forget the magic trick.
Yeah, exactly. And we keep making the same
Darn it, we keep doing it.
Can you do sense making without naming? Meaning, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I think for me, you can make sense of things with people in collective, and that's the word I would use instead of collaborative. Is working somehow in collective with people to learn in collective. But I'm betting that we would all walk away, even from this conversation, with some of our own perspectives of what that means to us. So I don't know.
And I guess I'm confusing naming with language.
We just did it.
Okay. And each
She
of
made
us.
sense of my reaching my hand out that way. She made a particular sense of it. She could have done something else.
In that sense making?
Yeah.
And that's also language.
Yeah. You don't have to name it.
Yeah, language, but not words.
Gesture.
You're languaging that.
Your
means of
students making
communicating.
sense of it with graphics.
So does description include, if you describe things, is that naming it?
I'm kind of asking that question.
Yeah.
Which is well, here's the thing. I'm hearing a distinction between naming.
Or is it identifying? Is a descriptor an identifier? As opposed to
I mean, how do you escape it? Is what I'm saying. Like in
a
the
label.
Let me give a parallel because it's more familiar maybe. In the mental health world, we say, diagnosis is labeling. No, but I say diagnosis is not the only form of labeling. When I say, this kid had a bad childhood, that's still naming. It's just not naming in that diagnostic category, but you did make some kind of category and said bad childhood. So the parallel of that is, and this is the what next or now what or whatever.
Yep.
Can research just be an experience? Do we have to have, because that was a performance for me, right? Can we leave it at
You
that?
can think of it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And
You can name it that way.
That's all. Anything can be called naming, perhaps.
Yeah, but you can experience it without naming it. But once you have to write about it, you have to name it.
But even when you talk about it,
Yeah.
to just say, I had this experience. The minute you walk out and say, what did you do in this group, you're starting to name it.
Well, I'm describing it actually. I don't know if I'm naming it.
Can you describe without naming is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't.
Yes, I think you can. I think you can say what your own experience was and how it felt, and own it as your own experience without giving it a name.
So then what's a name? I guess I'm not sure that what you mean by
But
name.
the problem is when you want to share, no? Because if you are experiencing collaborative research in your everyday life, but what happens when you want to share the experience? You have to name in a certain way in order to share with others. No?
No, have you ever said, gosh, it's this, and you go into a huge description and you go, I don't know what to call that. So it's not being named, however it's being described.
Blah,
so there's
blah, blah.
words being blah, blah, blah.
And they all understood it.
And we did.
All right.
So that is naming
Blah, blah, blah. It
It's-
has to be in
well-
our 5 minutes.
Well, it's describing in terms of context, in terms of meaning, but is it giving it a name?
What is naming?
Not always.
Let me try an analogy.
Yes, please do.
On a tour of Maastricht many years ago, I had this wonderful tour guide, and he described the house addressing system prior to Napoleon. There was none. And you would go to a house that was on this street, and you would follow directions, and ultimately there was some indicia on the house, such as there was a branch over the door, or some indicator, some symbol, some relic, some rubric, if you want to call it that, of indication of this was a proper house. Along comes Napoleon, and we introduce names of streets, and we introduce numbering systems over time. and family names of people. I see that as illustrative of this distinction. Now, what does it bring to us to have addresses and things like that? It does facilitate certain activities.
Like drilling down.
Yeah. So there's a tension, but it also constrains how we think about things.
And I'm open to be convinced, but I don't see a distinction between naming and describing, because for me both are language games, and depending on which language game we're in, we move to a particular way of talking or performing or gesturing.
But going to that address is always described. And there's no name, there's a name for the house with the branch or with the rock or whatever. But it's not 3 Avenue to something.
It is language.
Isn't that the main point?
Yeah,
It's ambiguous.
I think the word name is how people interpret that.
It's a specific identifier that we get into with the naming.
It is, yeah.
And then we get caught in those specific identifiers because they're reflective of historical practice and perhaps not reflective of what's happening or what needs to happen.
And I'm challenging us to think that there's a myth that description is not naming. It's just maybe shorter, but when you get to somehow, like again, on the stage when you get there and we have to do whatever we do, it's a way of naming this, it's a way of describing this, it's a way of doing something with this. In that process of sense making and presenting, we've created something other than what was this, but we're also saying it is this.
It is a shorthand for a longer series of processes. However, let's say that we created an address system with the houses with branches, and then we introduce a numbered streets with numbered houses. Suddenly that naming doesn't apply anymore. It's out of date. It's less efficient. And that's what's happening in our research world. We have taken a nomenclature and a system of classification and thinking of research, which is inappropriate to where we need to go as societies. And most of the stuff produced by tenured university faculty is not useful, at least in my discipline.
And Bateson talks about it as decontextualizing, I mean, not those words, but he talks about that in this notion of what we have created in research is to pull it out of context.
And you have to do that to have a valid research project. If you don't take away virtually any uncontrollable context, you can't run statistics.
And I think that's what's next, which is how do you see anything and everything as a process of research of everyday life, which is slightly different than I think what we were talking earlier.
Well, that a little bit comes back to Kaizen, and the Boeing example is interesting. The Japanese aren't worried about case studies.
Well,
because it resides, they have a high context organization. Right. So Kaizen resides in the relationships in the organization.
I was just
Boeing,
using that
I love your example because Boeing, being a Western company, must have a named object and output from Kaizen.
Right.
Not the Japanese. They don't need
Back
that.
to the reservation.
Because it's part of what they are. It's a part of the way they work. But Boeing, it is not.
So research as we know it today is inherently about naming. And what we've been talking...
So the people that make sense? People find the name, I guess.
Ontologies, all these wonderful things.
The name to make sense for themselves.
I think we're in the danger of reifying research. Yeah. One of the things we were doing was exploring the many different ways in which we could work with others, call it inquiry, call it research.
I'm getting down to the name.
Thinking of it, thinking of it as finding out, or thinking of it as transforming. I just checked in the language that the wonderful Sandra Harding used. If anyone knows her work, the feminist philosophy of science, and she talks about transforming inquiries, and we used her language as enlarging possible worlds.
Yeah. That's lovely.
Which I think is just a beautiful description of maybe how we could think about how we go on from here. Wherever here is.
I think you're thinking about the 5-minute assignment, right?
It's actually
It's
a
deliverable.
nice segue into it.
Yeah, it is a good segue, but I was.
There is no deliverable. It's just we were. We are.
And we will be.
And we saved you 4 minutes and 45 seconds. We will now sit down.
We were, we are, and we will be. That's it.
Yeah.
And blah, blah,
What do you reckon?
That's good. You know, it's kind of like David said yesterday. If anybody heard David speak, or was it yesterday, or the day before? I don't know. I'm losing. I'm getting disoriented. But he talked about how the dialogue he's getting away from dialogue because it seems to be going awry, and he's into just doing. And maybe that's what research is in the performance place. Is just doing and being.
Well,
Very good.
Yes.
time for bedford, everybody.
What did you say? I didn't.
Magic roundabout.
No, it's all sounding like blah, blah, blah to me.
It's
Seriously.
actually the title of a book.
And there's nothing wrong with blah, blah, blah.
It seriously is. What are you talking about?
You're too young to have seen Magic Roundabout.
Roundabout.
At the end of the program, this little character says, "Time for bed," says Zebedee. And then they come on with the roundabout, and there's this pretty little music, and that's it. And then I can go back to training my engineers in the training course.
I think that's like your closing credits?
Yeah.
Would that be?
Definitely. We've worn ourselves out.
But what now? What now?
So what now?
What now? Now what? Whichever way it goes.
Time for tea.
Yes. Well said.
Okay, well, I'm the one calling out the group numbers. That's
There you go.
And the research group will just stand in their
no,
seats.
it's gonna go. Oh no, I could choose to go last or first.
No, we won't get a choice.
She's the
She's
No,
the
I'm
person
the,
who's
I'm
the
sorry,
Oh, you're the
I'm
neighbor.
the number.
She's the number neighbor.
She's the
chooser.
number.
I'm
Last
the
time
number
you
chooser.
last time
Well,
you
I
went
think
bottom
last,
up.
So maybe I'll
last
do
is
it the other
a good
way.
position because
I could also do it random.
be
can do
short.
it random.
There you go.
Great minds think alike. Or something like that.
So
What would
now?
we?
What
What
are we
would we
going
like
on the
to
stage
do?
with?
For the record, I do name my cars, and everybody else's I come in contact. Give them
Name your cars.
personality.
My kids do that too. My kids do that too.
I name.
My son had one name for it. My daughter had another. It was Hank and something else.
And my mom said, before you name it, I'm naming my car this time.
So I have an idea. Is to leave with a question. What was it that you read?
Harding?
Yeah.
Sandra Harding.
Pose a question and get everybody thinking.
Transforming.
If they have any brain.
So is research drilling down? It's a very easy question. I should dive into it. But is research drilling down to the naming? Or can we create research and inquiry to be?
Transforming possible worlds.
Or what if we did this? Just say, now what? You say a phrase. Now what? You say a phrase. Now what? You say a phrase. It could be done in less than a minute and a half.
People want to go get dressed for dinner.
And we have to get out of here because they have to transform this room.
Oh, hell's
What are you
teeth, everyone's
thinking?
gone.
Three Elijah. Three groups.
Time to go.
All right, Henry.
Well, you know, I'm running out of
Bye, guys.
here.
Had fun talking to you.
Thank you.
Now what? Now what? Keep thinking. Now what? We are going.